The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Colonel James Washington's apartment as he packed his briefcase with careful precision. Today wasn't just any day. As the head military strategist for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he was flying to San Francisco for a conference that could reshape America's defense policy for the next decade. James glanced at the framed photos on his desk, his late wife smiling on their wedding day, his daughter in her college graduation gown, his son in his own military uniform. 23 years of service had taught him that family was what he was really fighting for, not just abstract concepts of national security. Keys, wallet, phone, credentials, he mumbled to himself, patting each pocket of his crisp navy blue uniform. The 4 stars on his shoulder caught the light as he moved. His phone buzzed with a message from General Thompson. Safe travels. Remember, those documents don't leave your sight. James sent back a thumbs-up emoji. The leather briefcase handcuffed to his wrist contained plans that had taken months to develop. Strategies for dealing with emerging threats that couldn't be transmitted electronically. Old school, but sometimes the old ways were still the safest. The Uber ride to Reagan National Airport was quiet. The driver, an older man with salt and pepper hair, kept glancing in the rearview mirror. "Military man, huh?" he finally asked. "Yes, sir," James replied with a small smile. "My boy's in the Army. Afghanistan, 2 tours. He's done his country proud," James said. "I hope he's home safe now." The driver nodded. "Working at Fort Bragg, got a little girl now." He paused. "Thank you for whatever it is you do." These small interactions always reminded James why his work mattered, not for the politics or power plays in Washington, but for people like this, regular folks just wanting to live their lives in peace. At the airport, James moved through security with practiced efficiency. His military ID and special clearance allowed him to bypass some of the usual procedures, though the briefcase required additional screening in a private room. The TSA agents were professional and quick. "Thank you for your service, Colonel," one young agent said as James gathered his belongings. The terminal was busy with the usual morning rush. Business travelers typing furiously on laptops, families corralling excited children, college students with headphones and backpacks. James bought a black coffee and found a quiet corner to review his notes before boarding. His phone rang. It was Lisa Chen, his deputy and right hand for the past 5 years. "Everything on schedule, sir?" she asked. "So far, so good," James replied. "How's the home front?" The Secretary of Defense called again. "He's nervous about the Chinese delegation." James sighed. "Tell him what we discussed. We're not changing our position on Taiwan." "Yes, sir. And your presentation for tomorrow?" "Got it right here," he tapped the briefcase. "Version 6 with all the updates." "Good luck, sir. Call when you land." James hung up and sipped his coffee, watching people hurry past. At 55, he sometimes felt the weight of his responsibilities more heavily than before. The world was changing faster than ever, threats evolving in ways that kept him awake at night. Cyber attacks, biological weapons, artificial intelligence. The battlefield had expanded beyond anything he'd been trained for decades ago. The boarding announcement for his flight cut through his thoughts. First class was boarding, and his ticket would allow him to go now, but James always waited. An old habit from his early days as an officer. Never be first, never be last, observe everything. When Zone 2 was called, he gathered his things and joined the line. A young family stood in front of him, the father juggling passports while the mother tried to keep their toddler from wandering off. "Here, let me help," James offered, holding the man's coffee while he sorted out their documents. "Thanks," the father said with relief. "First time flying with her." "It's an adventure," James smiled. "The adventure's just beginning." On the jetway, James nodded to the flight attendants and ducked his head through the aircraft door. First class was half full. He found his seat, 3A, window, and stowed his small carry-on overhead, keeping the briefcase at his feet as required by protocol. A middle-aged woman in a business suit took the aisle seat beside him. "Good morning," she said pleasantly. "Morning," James replied with a polite nod. "Business or pleasure?" she asked, settling in. "Business. USM Tech Conference. I'm giving a talk on cybersecurity." That caught James's attention. "Important field." "Getting more important every day," she agreed. "I'm Helen, by the way." "James," he responded, not offering his last name or rank. Another habit. The boarding continued around them. James watched each passenger with the subtle assessment that had become second nature over years of security work. Most were obvious business travelers or tourists, nothing unusual. A group of college-age kids filed in, laughing about something on someone's phone. An elderly couple helped each other store their bags. As the plane filled, James felt someone watching him. He casually glanced around and caught the eye of a man about 10 rows back who quickly looked away. Something about the man's posture made James take note. Too stiff, too alert. Probably nothing, but James had learned to trust his instincts. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard the flight to San Francisco. The usual safety demonstration followed. James always paid attention despite having flown hundreds of times. Details mattered. As the plane pushed back from the gate, James allowed himself to relax slightly. He'd review his presentation once they reached cruising altitude, then try to get some rest. The conference would be 3 intense days of discussions and negotiations with military leaders from allied countries. The plane taxied slowly toward the runway. Outside the window, airport workers in bright vests directed traffic with illuminated batons. It was a clear day for flying. Not a fan of takeoffs, Helen commented beside him, gripping her armrests as the engines revved. Statistically, the safest part of air travel. After cruising, James said reassuringly. Statistics don't help much when you're nervous, she replied with a small laugh. I fly twice a month and never got used to it. The plane gathered speed, pressing them back into their seats, then lifted smoothly into the air. Washington, D.C. fell away below them, the Potomac River gleaming in the morning light. James always felt a certain pride seeing the Capitol from above, the mall, the monuments, the Pentagon in the distance. For all its flaws and complications, he'd devoted his life to protecting what those buildings represented. Once the seatbelt sign dinged off, the cabin came alive with movement. Flight attendants prepared the drink service. Passengers retrieved items from bags or adjusted seats. James kept the briefcase where it was, feeling its reassuring weight against his leg. He accepted a coffee when the cart came by and opened his personal tablet to review his notes. The presentation tomorrow would outline America's strategic vision for the Pacific region. Over the next 5 years, walking a delicate line between standing firm against Chinese expansion and avoiding unnecessary provocation. The man he'd noticed earlier got up to use the bathroom, passing their row. James caught another glimpse of his face. Mid-30s, clean-shaven, unremarkable except for the intensity in his eyes. As he passed, the man seemed to look directly at James's briefcase. A small alarm bell rang in James's mind. Probably nothing, just his professional paranoia acting up. But he made a mental note to stay alert. Halfway through his coffee, James felt his eyelids growing heavy. The 5 a.m. wake-up call was catching up with him. He put his tablet away, reclined his seat slightly, and closed his eyes. The steady hum of the engines created a soothing white noise. He didn't mean to fall asleep, but the next thing he knew, the plane was experiencing turbulence. He blinked awake, immediately checking that the briefcase was still secure. It was. Quite a bumpy patch, Helen commented, looking slightly pale. James nodded, checking his watch. They'd been in the air about 2 hours. Should pass soon. The captain's voice confirmed this a moment later, apologizing for the rough air and promising smoother flying ahead. The seatbelt sign remained on. James used the opportunity to survey the cabin again. Most passengers seemed unconcerned by the turbulence, continuing to watch movies or work on laptops. The college kids were playing some kind of card game. The man he'd noticed earlier was reading a magazine, occasionally glancing up. When the turbulence subsided, James excused himself and made his way to the restroom, briefcase still attached to his wrist. In the small mirror above the sink, he noticed the tiredness in his eyes. This job had aged him, no question. The silver at his temples had spread through his close-cropped hair, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. Back at his seat, James accepted another coffee and pulled out the secure satellite phone he carried for emergencies. No messages. Good news. Important man with important business? Helen asked with a curious smile. James gave a non-committal shrug. Just checking in with the office. As the flight continued, James allowed himself to think about what came after this conference. His retirement was scheduled for next year. After decades of service, the prospect of civilian life both excited and terrified him. He'd bought a small cabin on a lake in Vermont, imagining quiet days fishing and writing his memoirs. His daughter wanted him to move closer to her family in Texas instead. Options he'd never had time to consider. The seatbelt sign dinged off as the plane taxied toward the gate. Passengers immediately began the familiar routine of gathering belongings and checking phones that had been in airplane mode. James remained seated in no rush to join the inevitable crowding in the aisle. The briefcase rested securely against his leg, its weight a constant reminder of his responsibility. "Nice flying with you," Helen said, as she stood and retrieved her bag from the overhead bin. "Good luck with your business in San Francisco." "You too," James replied with a polite nod. "Hope your conference goes well." As other passengers filed past, James noticed the man he'd been watching earlier was also waiting, seated several rows back. Their eyes met briefly before the man looked down at his phone. Something about him still bothered James, but he couldn't put his finger on what exactly seemed off. James checked his own phone and found a message from his driver confirming he was waiting in the arrivals area. Good. The sooner he got to the secure facility, the better. When most of the first-class cabin had emptied, James stood, retrieving his small carry-on from the overhead bin while keeping the briefcase close. He nodded to the flight attendants as he made his way toward the exit. "Thank you for your service, sir," one of them said, noticing his uniform. James was halfway down the jetway when he realized the man from the plane was right behind him, close enough that James could hear his breathing. The hairs on the back of James's neck stood up, an instinct honed through years in dangerous situations. Without being obvious, James adjusted his pace, allowing other passengers to come between them. The terminal was busy with the usual airport chaos, announcements echoing overhead, people rushing to connections, emotional reunions at gates. James spotted 2 airport police officers standing near a coffee shop and felt a small sense of relief. He made his way toward the baggage claim, following signs and moving with the flow of deplaning passengers. The crowd thinned as they passed through a less busy section of the terminal. James glanced back and saw the man was still there, about 20 feet behind, pretending to look at his phone but clearly keeping pace. James reached for his own phone, ready to call his driver and have him meet at the security checkpoint instead of baggage claim, when he felt someone bump into him from the side. "Oh, sorry, sir." A young woman had accidentally knocked into him while trying to wrangle 2 large suitcases. "No problem," James said, steadying her luggage. In that brief moment of distraction, the man had closed the distance between them. When James looked up, he was only a few feet away, his hand inside his jacket. James's training kicked in. He assessed the situation in seconds. Crowded public space, potential threat, civilians everywhere. Direct confrontation was too risky. "Can I help you?" James asked calmly, shifting his stance slightly to a more defensive position. The man seemed startled to be addressed directly. No, sorry." His hand remained inside his jacket. James was about to move away when a voice called out behind him, "Colonel Washington." James turned to see a young man in a suit hurrying toward him, holding up what looked like a security badge. "TSA security, sir. We need you to come with us, please." "What's this about?" James asked, immediately suspicious. The timing was too convenient. "Just a routine security matter, sir. If you'll follow me." James noticed 2 more men in similar suits approaching from different directions. The first man who had been following him had backed away slightly, looking uncertain. "I'd like to see some identification," James said firmly. The young man frowned. "Sir, we need to handle this discreetly. Please come with us now." Something was very wrong. These weren't standard TSA procedures. James had been through enough security checks in his career to know when protocol wasn't being followed. "I'm going to need to make a call first," James said, reaching for his satellite phone. "That won't be necessary, sir." The man's tone hardened as he moved closer. "In fact, I'll need to take that phone." The other 2 men had flanked James now, creating a triangle around him. Passengers walked past, some glancing curiously at the scene but most absorbed in their own journeys. "I'm carrying classified materials," James said quietly. "I have proper clearance and documentation. Whatever concern you have, we can address it through official channels." "The phone, sir," the man repeated, holding out his hand. "And the briefcase," that confirmed it. No legitimate security officer would ask him to hand over classified materials in the middle of an airport terminal. These men weren't TSA. James tensed, ready to defend himself if necessary. but aware of the civilians all around them. A confrontation here would be dangerous for everyone. Is there a problem here? The new voice came from behind the men. James looked up to see an actual airport police officer approaching, hand resting casually on his belt near his weapon. The three men exchanged glances. The one who had been speaking recovered quickly. "No problem, officer. Just a routine security check." The officer looked skeptical. "ID, please. All of you." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. James remained still, waiting to see how this would play out. The first man reluctantly reached for what appeared to be a badge holder. As he did, James noticed something that made his blood run cold. Beneath the man's jacket was what looked like a shoulder holster. The officer must have seen it too. His hand moved to his weapon. "Sir, are you armed?" Everything happened very quickly after that. The man lunged forward, shoving past James toward the officer. The other two scattered in different directions. Passengers nearby began shouting and moving away from the commotion. "Stop! Police!" the officer yelled, drawing his weapon. James ducked to one side, pulling the briefcase close and reaching for his phone. He needed to call this in immediately. Whatever was happening, it involved him and potentially the classified materials he was carrying. That made it a matter of national security. More officers were running toward the disturbance now. The terminal erupted into chaos as people scattered, some dropping luggage in their haste to get away from the drawn weapons. James backed against a wall, quickly dialing a secure number. "This is Colonel Washington. Authentication code Victor 9 Delta 7. I have a situation at San Francisco International Airport. Possible attempt to intercept classified materials." As he spoke, he watched the officer tackle one of the men to the ground. The other two had disappeared into the crowd. "Stay where you are, sir," came the response. "Security team en route." "Ita, 4 minutes." James ended the call and surveyed the scene. Airport police had formed a perimeter around the area. Passengers were being directed away. The man who had been tackled was now in handcuffs, lying face down on the floor. "Sir?" A different officer approached James cautiously. "Are you all right?" "Yes," James replied. "But we need to secure this area." "I'm Colonel James Washington, Joint Chiefs Strategic Division." Those men were attempting to intercept classified materials. The officer looked uncertain. "I'll need to see some identification, sir." James carefully reached for his military ID and security clearance card. The officer examined them closely. "Thank you, Colonel. We have a secure room where you can wait for your team." James nodded. "I need to stay with this man you've apprehended. He may have accomplices still in the terminal." More officers had arrived, along with what appeared to be airport security management. James was escorted to a small conference room off the main terminal. The handcuffed man brought in separately and placed under guard. The minutes ticked by slowly. James kept the briefcase on his lap, still handcuffed to his wrist. He tried calling his driver, but got no answer. That was concerning. The driver had been arranged through proper military channels and should have been monitoring his phone. 20 minutes later, the door opened and a man in a dark suit entered. He showed James an FBI badge. "Colonel Washington?" "Agent Paul Richards. We got the alert about the attempted interception." James stood. "Thank you for responding quickly. Have you identified the men?" "We're working on that now. The one we have in custody isn't talking, but we've got facial recognition running." Agent Richards paused. "Colonel, when was the last time you verified the contents of your briefcase?" The question caught James off guard. "Before boarding in D.C., why?" "We have reason to believe this may have been more than a simple interception attempt. Our intelligence suggests there might have been a switch operation planned." James looked down at the briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. It looked identical to the one he'd started with, but a good forgery would. "We need to verify the contents immediately," James said. Agent Richards nodded. "We've set up a secure room for that purpose. But first I need to ask, did you notice anything unusual during your flight? Anyone who paid particular attention to you or your briefcase?" James thought about the man who had been watching him. "There was one passenger who seemed to be monitoring me. Mid-30s, about 5'10", brown hair. He was seated about 10 rows behind me." "That matches the description of one of the men who escaped," Richard said. "We've got people reviewing the security footage now." A knock at the door interrupted them. Another FBI agent entered and whispered something to Richards, whose expression darkened. "What is it?" James asked. Richards hesitated. "Sir, we've just received information that your driver was found unconscious in the parking garage. His credentials and vehicle were taken. The implications." The secure room in the airport's administration section felt too small for the number of people now crowded inside it. James sat at a table, the suspicious briefcase in front of him still attached to his wrist. Agent Richards stood nearby, speaking quietly into his phone. 2 bomb technicians in protective gear waited by the door, and an airport security officer stood guard. "We're going to need you to open it, Colonel," Richards said, putting his phone away. "Our scan shows no explosives, but we can't be sure what's inside without looking." James nodded. He input the combination slowly, aware that if this was indeed a switched briefcase, he had no idea what might be inside. The technicians tensed as the locks clicked open. "Stand back, sir," one of them said, stepping forward with gloved hands. James moved away, the handcuff chain extending to its full length as the technician carefully raised the lid. Everyone in the room held their breath. Inside were papers, documents that looked remarkably similar to the ones James had been carrying. The technician carefully removed them and spread them on a separate table. "They're forgeries," James said after a quick examination. "Good ones, but not the originals." Richards leaned in to look. "Why replace classified documents with fake ones? Why not just steal them?" "Because they didn't want me to know they'd been taken," James replied grimly. "If I hadn't noticed that scratch on the lock, I might have delivered these to the conference without realizing they weren't the real documents." The implications were disturbing. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths not just to obtain the original plans, but to ensure James didn't realize they were missing. "We need to lock down this airport," James said firmly. "Whoever took my briefcase is probably still trying to get out with the real documents." Richards nodded and began issuing orders. As he did, James's secure phone rang. "Washington," he answered. "Colonel, this is General Thompson." The voice of James's superior was tight with concern. "We've been informed of the situation. What's your status?" "Physically unharmed, but the documents have been compromised," James reported. "We're working to contain the situation." "That's going to be complicated," Thompson said. "I just received a call from the San Francisco Police Department. They're sending officers to detain you." James straightened in his chair. "Detain me? On what grounds?" "A passenger on your flight claims you threatened him and were carrying a weapon. Given your security clearance, this should be easily cleared up, but it's adding another layer to an already complex situation." James felt a chill run down his spine. This was too coordinated to be a coincidence. "General, I believe this is part of the same operation. Create confusion, multiple jurisdictions, delay our response while they escape with the documents." "I agree," Thompson said. "Stay put. I'm sending a team from the nearby base. They'll have proper documentation to take custody of you and the situation." As James ended the call, the door to the secure room opened. A group of uniformed police officers entered, led by a detective in plain clothes. "I'm Detective Wilson, SFPD," the man announced, showing his badge. "We're here for Colonel Washington." Richards stepped forward. "Agent Richards, FBI. We're in the middle of a national security situation here, Detective." "We have a complaint against the Colonel," Wilson said firmly. "A passenger from his flight has made serious allegations. We need to take him in for questioning." "That can wait," Richards argued. "We have a breach of classified materials that takes priority." The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. James remained seated, observing the power struggle playing out in front of him. This was exactly what Thompson had warned about: jurisdictional conflicts creating delays and confusion. "With all due respect, Agent," Wilson said, "we have a civilian claiming a military officer threatened him with violence. That falls under our jurisdiction, not yours." Another officer stepped forward, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Colonel Washington, please stand up slowly and put your hands where we can see them." Richards moved between James and the officers. "This is absurd. The Colonel is the victim here." "It's all right," James said calmly, standing up. "I'll cooperate. But you should know this is part of a larger operation targeting classified defense materials." The detective looked skeptical. "We'll sort all that out at the station. Now please turn around and place your hands behind your back." James looked at Richards, who gave a small nod. Better to comply now and sort it out later than escalate the situation further. "I'll need to remove the briefcase first," James said, holding up his wrist with the handcuff. "We'll take care of that at the station," the officer said. "That's not possible," Richards interjected. "That briefcase contains classified materials. It cannot leave federal custody." The standoff continued for several tense moments before Wilson reluctantly agreed. "Fine. Remove the briefcase, but it stays with my officers. It stays with the FBI, Richards countered firmly. While they argued, James used the key to unlock the handcuff, freeing himself from the briefcase. As he did, he noticed one of the officers watching him with unusual intensity. There was something off about the man's uniform, too. The badge didn't quite match those of the other officers. James's instincts flared again. He caught Richards' eye and gave a subtle nod toward the suspicious officer. Richards followed his gaze, his expression changing slightly as he too noticed the discrepancies. "Detective," Richards said carefully, "can I see your team's identification again?" Wilson frowned. "We've already shown you—" Before he could finish, the suspicious officer suddenly drew his weapon. "Nobody move!" Chaos erupted. The other officers, caught by surprise, reached for their own weapons. Richards dove toward James, pushing him down behind the table as shots rang out. "Police! Drop your weapon!" Someone shouted, more shouting, more gunshots. James stayed low, years of combat training kicking in. He heard glass breaking, heavy footsteps, radio calls for backup. When the shooting stopped, James cautiously looked up. The suspicious officer was on the ground, wounded. Real police officers had him surrounded, weapons trained on him. Detective Wilson was pressing a hand to his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. "Everyone okay?" Richards called out, getting to his feet. "What the hell just happened?" Wilson demanded, wincing in pain. "That man is not one of yours," James said, pointing to the wounded imposter. "I'm guessing he's connected to the team that stole my documents." Airport security officers and more FBI agents were rushing into the room now, responding to the sound of gunfire. The wounded fake officer was being handcuffed despite his injuries. "Get a medic for the detective," Richards ordered, then turned to James. "Are you hurt, Colonel?" "I'm fine," James replied, though his heart was racing. It had been years since he'd been in the middle of a firefight, and even longer since one had taken him by surprise like this. As the room filled with emergency responders, James's secure phone rang again. It was Thompson. "Colonel, what's your situation? We heard reports of gunfire." "We're secure for now," James reported. "But it's worse than we thought, General. They infiltrated the local police. One of their operatives was posing as an officer in the team sent to detain me." There was a moment of silence on the other end. "This is a sophisticated operation, Colonel. Whoever is behind it has resources and connections we didn't anticipate. And they still have the original documents," James reminded him. "Not for long," Thompson said firmly. "Our team is 5 minutes out, and TSA has locked down all departures. No one's leaving that airport with those documents." As James ended the call, he noticed the FBI agents had gathered around a laptop. Richards waved him over. "We've got something, Colonel." Airport security cameras caught a man, matching the description of one of our suspects, heading to the international terminal about 20 minutes ago. The grainy footage showed a man in a business suit, walking briskly through the terminal, carrying a briefcase that looked identical to the one James had been transporting. "That's him," James confirmed. "And that's my briefcase." Richards immediately got on his radio. "All units, suspect heading to international terminal. Gate area A, male, approximately 35-40 years old, dark business suit, carrying black leather briefcase. Consider armed and dangerous." The room was quickly emptying as agents and officers rushed to intercept the suspect. James moved to follow them, but Richards put a hand on his arm. "Colonel, I can't let you go out there. It's too dangerous, and frankly, we don't know who else might be involved." James understood the logic, but every instinct told him he needed to be part of this operation. Those documents contained sensitive information that could compromise national security if they fell into the wrong hands. "Agent Richards, those are my responsibility," he said firmly. "I'm going." Richards looked like he wanted to argue, but instead handed James a bulletproof vest. "Put this on, and stay behind my team." Minutes later, they were moving through the airport terminal, now largely empty of passengers who had been evacuated after the gunfire. FBI agents and airport police formed a protective circle around James as they headed toward the international terminal. Over the radio, they heard updates from the teams already in position. The suspect had been spotted at Gate A7, apparently waiting for a flight to Hong Kong that was in final boarding. "He's not getting on that plane," Richards said grimly. As they approached the gate area, James could see the eye. Time seemed to slow down as James felt the gun pressed against his ribs. Despite decades of training, the cold touch of metal through his shirt sent a primal fear through him. The suspect's eyes were wild, desperate. The look of a cornered animal. "Drop your weapon, now!" Richard's voice cut through the chaos, steady and authoritative. Around them, passengers screamed and ducked for cover. Airport security rushed to evacuate the area. FBI agents formed a circle, weapons drawn but hesitant to fire with James so close to the suspect. "You're surrounded," James said quietly to the man. "There's no way out of this terminal." The suspect's breathing was rapid, sweat beading on his forehead. "You don't understand what's happening here, Colonel." "Then explain it to me," James replied, trying to keep his voice calm despite the gun still pressed to his side. The standoff stretched for what felt like minutes, but was likely only seconds. James could hear Richards coordinating his team through their earpieces, positioning snipers, clearing civilians. "Last chance," Richards called out. "Drop your weapon or we will fire." Something changed in the suspect's eyes, a decision made. He moved the gun slightly, just enough for James to make his move. With a swift motion honed through years of combat training, James grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it away from his body. The gun discharged, the bullet hitting the floor as they struggled. FBI agents rushed forward. James felt himself being pulled away as others tackled the suspect to the ground. The briefcase skidded across the polished airport floor. "Secure the documents," James shouted, pointing to the briefcase. Two agents immediately moved to retrieve it while others handcuffed the now subdued suspect. Richards helped James to his feet. "Are you hit?" he asked urgently. James did a quick self-assessment. "No, I'm fine." Richards looked like he wanted to scold James for his reckless action, but instead just shook his head. "That was either very brave or very stupid, Colonel." "Sometimes there's not much difference," James replied, straightening his uniform jacket. His heart was still racing, but the immediate danger had passed. An agent approached with the briefcase. "Sir, we've secured this." James took it carefully, examining the exterior. It was indeed his original briefcase. He recognized the small nick on the bottom corner from when he'd bumped it against his desk last month. He entered the combination and opened it to find his original documents inside, seemingly untouched. "We'll need to verify nothing's been copied or photographed," he told Richards. "Already arranging for that," Richards replied. "We've got digital forensics en route." As the area was secured, James watched the suspect being led away by multiple agents. The man's earlier desperation had been replaced by a stoic resignation. He no longer looked like a dangerous operative, just a man who knew he'd failed at his mission. "Colonel Washington?" James turned to see a different FBI agent approaching, a tablet in hand. "We've identified the suspect," the agent said, showing James the screen. "His name is David Chen. He's a known operative with connections to foreign intelligence." James studied the file, displayed on the tablet. History of suspected espionage activities across 3 continents, all with thin evidence but consistent patterns. "Chinese intelligence?" James asked, though he already suspected the answer. "That's our working theory," the agent confirmed. The flight to Hong Kong would support that. The pieces were falling into place. The strategic defense plans in James's briefcase detailed America's position on several contested areas in the South China Sea, information that would be extremely valuable to the Chinese government ahead of the upcoming negotiations. "We've got a second suspect in custody," Richards added, joining them. "The man who posed as a police officer. He's being treated for his wounds, but we expect to question him within the hour." "Good," James said. "I want to be there for that." "First, you need to be debriefed," Richards countered. "And we need to verify those documents haven't been compromised." James knew he was right. Protocol existed for a reason. "Where's the military team General Thompson sent?" "They're here," Richards said, gesturing to a group of uniformed personnel entering the terminal. "They'll escort you to a secure facility for debriefing." As the military team approached, James recognized their leader, Major William Turner from Joint Special Operations Command. They had worked together on a mission in the Middle East several years back. "Colonel Washington," Turner said with a brisk nod. "Good to see you in one piece, sir." "Likewise, Major," James replied. "Though it's been an interesting day." "So I've heard," Turner said with a grim smile. "We have a secure vehicle waiting. General Thompson is expecting your call as soon as we reach the facility." James turned to Richards. "Thank you for your help, Agent. I'd appreciate being kept in the loop about what you learn from the suspects." Richards nodded. "Of course, Colonel. And maybe next time don't tackle an armed suspect. James smiled slightly. No promises. The military escort led James through the now empty terminal, the briefcase once again securely handcuffed to his wrist. As they walked, James couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. The operation had been sophisticated, well coordinated, yet in the end it had failed rather spectacularly. It seemed almost too convenient. At the secure facility, a nondescript government building near the airport, James was led to a communication room where he immediately called General Thompson. "Colonel," Thompson's voice was heavy with relief. "I understand you've recovered the documents." "Yes, sir," James confirmed, "though I have concerns about potential compromise. The documents were out of my custody for at least an hour. We'll conduct a full analysis," Thompson assured him. "In the meantime, I've been in contact with the conference organizers. They've agreed to delay the proceedings by 24 hours to give us time to sort this out." James nodded, though Thompson couldn't see it. "Sir, something about this doesn't feel right. The operation was sophisticated, but the endgame was surprisingly sloppy." There was a pause on the other end. "What are you suggesting, Colonel?" "I'm not sure yet," James admitted, "but I'd like permission to stay involved in the investigation rather than proceeding directly to the conference." Another pause. "Granted. But I want you to work with the FBI, not around them, clear?" "Crystal, sir." After ending the call, James was escorted to a secure room where technicians were already examining the contents of his briefcase. Every page of the documents was being carefully analyzed for signs of tampering or copying. "Anything?" James asked the lead technician. "Nothing obvious, sir," the woman replied, not looking up from her work. "No sign of photocopying or scanning. But we're doing more advanced tests to check for trace evidence." James paced the room, his mind racing. If Chen was working for Chinese intelligence, why risk such a public operation? There were quieter, less risky ways to obtain information, and the timing, right before a major conference, seemed designed to create maximum disruption. His phone buzzed with a message from Richards. "Second suspect talking. You might want to hear this." 20 minutes later, James was in an observation room at the FBI field office, watching through one-way glass as agents questioned the man who had posed as a police officer. Unlike Chen, this man looked nervous, fidgeting in his chair despite the handcuffs securing him to the table. "He started talking almost immediately," Richard said, standing beside James. "Claims he was just hired muscle. Didn't know the full plan. Do you believe him?" James asked. Richard shrugged. "Partially. He's given us names and details that check out, but I think he knows more than he's saying." On the other side of the glass, the suspect leaned forward. "Look, I already told you. I was hired to create a distraction, that's all. The real target wasn't even the documents." James and Richards exchanged glances. "What do you mean the documents weren't the target?" the interviewing agent asked. "It was about discrediting him," the suspect said, nodding in the direction of the glass as if he knew James was watching. "The colonel. Get him detained by local police, create a scene. The documents were just a bonus." James felt a chill run down his spine. "He's lying," he said to Richards, trying to create confusion. Richards didn't look convinced. "Maybe. But why would someone want to discredit you specifically?" Before James could answer, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Washington," he answered cautiously. "Colonel," came a familiar voice. "Lisa Chen, his deputy. We have a situation at the Pentagon. Someone accessed your files, personnel records, security clearance, everything." James tensed. "When?" "While you were in the air. We only discovered it during a routine security sweep." She paused. "And there's more. The Secretary of Defense received an anonymous email claiming you're selling information to foreign governments." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't just about the documents, it was about him. Someone wanted to destroy his credibility right before the conference. "Lisa, I need you to pull my service record. Every commendation, every review, every security clearance renewal. And I need you to find out who's been asking questions about me in the last month." "Already on it," she replied. "But, Colonel, there's something else you should know. The breach. It came from inside our network. Someone with high-level access." James ended the call and turned to Richards, his expression grim. "We need to check Chen's phone records, emails, everything." "This—" James stared at the message on his phone for a long moment, before slipping the device back into his pocket. "Stand down." Simple and direct. a warning from someone who believed they had the authority to issue commands to a senior military officer. That narrowed the list of suspects considerably. He found a quiet corner in the FBI field office and made a call to the one person he trusted completely in this situation, his former commanding officer, retired Admiral Robert Hayes James. Hayes answered on the second ring. "Bit early for our monthly chess game." "Robert, I need your help," James said quietly. Off the books, there was a brief pause. "I'm listening." James explained the situation. The briefcase switch, the false accusations, the evidence pointing to someone inside the Defense Department. Hayes listened without interruption. "The conference starts tomorrow," James concluded. "Someone doesn't want me there presenting our current strategy." "Or wants you there but compromised," Hayes suggested. "Undermining your credibility would weaken the U.S. position in the negotiations." James hadn't considered that angle. "Either way, I need to know who's behind this. I still have some contacts who owe me favors," Hayes said. "People who operate outside the usual channels. Give me 2 hours." "I'm not sure we have that long," James replied, glancing at his watch. "The FBI is making progress, but whoever sent that message knows we're closing in. They might accelerate their timetable." 1 hour then, Hayes promised. "Stay safe, James." After ending the call, James returned to the main investigation area where Richards was coordinating the FBI response. Multiple agents were tracking phone records, reviewing security footage, and analyzing evidence from the airport incident. "Any progress on that number from the Defense Department office?" James asked. Richards nodded. The call came from an office used by visiting officials. According to the sign-in sheet, there were 3 people there today who could have made that call. "Names?" James prompted. "Colonel Philip Reynolds, Defense Intelligence Agency, Brigadier General Thomas Wilson, Joint Chiefs Liaison, and Dr. Andrea Powell, Defense Advanced Research Projects." James knew all 3. Reynolds was an ambitious career officer who had been passed over for promotion twice. Wilson was close to retirement, with a reputation for being a staunch traditionalist. Powell was brilliant but intensely private. James had worked with her on several classified projects but knew little about her personal life. "Any of them have connections to the Chinese government?" James asked. "We're looking into that now," Richards replied, "but so far nothing obvious." James's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Chen. "Found something. Check your secure email." He borrowed a laptop from one of the FBI agents and logged into his encrypted email account. Lisa had sent him a file containing security logs from the Pentagon system. Someone had indeed accessed his personnel file, using General Wilson's credentials. "Richards," James called out. "I need to speak with General Wilson immediately." Richards looked up from his work. "We're trying to locate him now. He's not answering his phone and he's not at the defense office." A bad feeling settled in James's stomach. "What about the other 2? Reynolds and Powell?" "Reynolds is in his hotel room. We have agents on the way to question him." "Powell?" Richards checked his notes. "She left the office about an hour ago. Said she was heading to the conference venue to check the security arrangements." The conference venue, where James was supposed to be presenting the strategic defense plans tomorrow. "I need to get to that venue," James said firmly. Richards shook his head. "Colonel, with all due respect, you might be the target here. We should send a team." "There's no time," James interrupted. "If I'm right, whoever is behind this is moving forward with their plan right now. And I'm the only one who knows exactly what's in those defense plans and might spot if they've been altered." Richards hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but you're taking a protective detail with you." 20 minutes later, James was in an FBI vehicle heading toward the Presidio, where the International Defense Conference was being held in a renovated military building with views of the Golden Gate Bridge. 4 agents accompanied him, along with Major Turner, who had insisted on joining when he heard James was heading to the venue. "What exactly are we looking for?" Turner asked as they drove. "I'm not sure yet," James admitted, "but the timing is too convenient. Someone goes to great lengths to discredit me right before I'm set to present our strategic position on the South China Sea." "You think they want to change our position?" Turner suggested. "Make us appear weaker or more aggressive than intended?" "Possibly," James said. "Or they want to create an incident at the conference itself, something that would disrupt the negotiations entirely." His phone rang, Hayes calling back earlier than expected. "What have you got?" James asked without preamble. "You're not going to like it," Hayes replied, his voice grim. "I talked to an old friend at the NSA. They've been monitoring unusual encrypted communications between someone at the Pentagon and contacts in both China and Russia. James felt his pulse quicken. A double agent? Worse, someone playing all sides, Hayes said. Selling information to multiple bidders, creating confusion and mistrust between major powers. The NSA has been building a case quietly, trying to identify the source, did they? James asked. Hayes paused. They suspect it's Dr. Andrea Powell. The name hit James like a physical blow. He had worked with Powell for years, trusted her judgment on sensitive matters. She had access to some of the nation's most classified research projects. Are they sure? He asked. Not enough to move on it officially, Hayes replied. But the evidence is compelling. Large cash deposits, encrypted communications, mysterious trips overseas. She's at the conference venue right now, James said, his mind racing, supposedly checking security arrangements. James, Hayes's voice was deadly serious. If Powell is the mole, she's not just after information. The NSA analysis suggests she's been working toward some larger objective, possibly a major disruption in U.S.-China relations. The conference would be the perfect opportunity, James realized. Representatives from 20 countries in one place discussing sensitive territorial issues. Be careful, Hayes warned. Powell is brilliant, and if she's been operating as a double agent this long, she's dangerous. As they approached the Presidio, James briefed Richards and the team on what Hayes had told him. Richards immediately called for backup and notified the conference security team. We need to find Powell without alerting her, Richards instructed his agents. Nobody moves on her until we have confirmation and know exactly what she's planning. The conference venue was a restored military building, its historic facade concealing modern security features inside. As they pulled up, James noticed additional security personnel being deployed around the perimeter, Richards' reinforcements arriving discreetly. Security office is on the ground floor, Turner said, studying the building plans on his tablet. If Dr. Powell was checking arrangements, that's where she'd start. James nodded. Let's split up. I'll take the main conference room. That's where the presentations will happen tomorrow. Richards, can your team cover the security office and surrounding areas? On it, Richards confirmed. Major Turner, stay with the colonel. They entered the building separately, communicating via earpieces. The venue was relatively quiet, with most delegates not scheduled to arrive until the following morning. Staff were setting up the main conference room, arranging flags and testing audio-visual equipment. James and Turner made their way to the presentation area, where James would have been standing tomorrow to deliver his briefing. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance. Colonel, Turner said quietly, nodding toward a laptop connected to the podium. That shouldn't be there yet. Presentation systems aren't supposed to be installed until tomorrow morning. James approached the podium carefully. The laptop was running, with what appeared to be a standard presentation software open on screen. But when James examined it more closely, he noticed a small device attached to one of the USB ports. Major, get Richards here now, James said, keeping his voice low. And don't touch anything. Turner stepped away to make the call while James continued his examination without touching the equipment. The device looked like a standard flash drive, but something about it seemed off. There was a tiny red light blinking on one end. Colonel Washington, a voice came from behind him. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. James turned to see Dr. Andrea Powell standing in the doorway of the conference room. She looked exactly as she always did, professional, composed, with her gray-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything other than the respected defense scientist he had known for years. Andrea, James acknowledged, careful to keep his tone casual. I came early to check the setup. After what happened today, I wanted to make sure everything was in order. Yes, I heard about the incident at the airport, she said, walking slowly into the room. Quite disturbing. Are you all right? Fine, James replied, watching her movements carefully. Just concerned about security. Powell smiled slightly. Always the vigilant one, James. That's why you've lasted so long in this business. There was something in her tone, a hint of condescension, perhaps, or regret, that confirmed James's suspicions.